So far, we've looked at some of the basic factors that govern the strength of interactions of synapses on the dendritic arbor of a postsynaptic neuron. Taking a step back, why would we want multiple inputs arriving at one neuron in the first place? Where do these inputs come from? How do these interactions work at a network level? The function of complex neuronal systems is an active area of research, but we can identify some basic motifs that are found throughout the nervous system. Let's start with three of the most basic principles of neuronal network organization: convergence, divergence, and recurrence. Convergence and divergence are naturally related, so let's start with them. Convergence is when multiple, potentially disparate inputs come together to synapse on a single downstream neuron. Convergence is pervasive through the nervous system, and it's essential to our survival. At a high level, convergence is quite intuitive. Our brains are constantly bringing together scraps of ambiguous sensory information from different senses and synthesizing them together into a coherent whole. Have you ever been to a party and momentarily forgotten the name of one of the guests? You rack your brain to put a name to a face, and then they speak, and you add the sound of their voice to the mix. Details about them come up in conversation. Each new piece of information is a clue added to the whole, bringing you closer to reactivating the pattern of brain activity, the memory, that will give you their name. Our brains are masters at this kind of convergence. A brief glimpse of movement in the tall grass, integrated together with the sound of rustling, can drive a startle response that might have saved one of your distant Paleolithic ancestors from a gruesome fate. One can imagine each of these inputs collectively converging to bring neurons that drive a fear response to threshold. On the other side of the coin is divergence, where one neuron sends a signal to many. Here again, the example of our distant ancestor walking in the tall grass is illustrative. When he first senses that something's potentially dangerous in the grass, a cascade of neuronal activity is set into action. Sending a signal to just one neuron or muscle won't do. The entire body must be alerted. Heart rate rises. Breathing hastens. Pupils dilate. Muscles tense in preparation to run. In a few brief moments, we've pivoted from collection of disconnected sensory impressions, converged these signals onto neurons that generate a feeling of fear, which in turn send signals that diverge to nearly every part of our body to produce specific coordinated action. Now, our tall grass example involves many neurons, and we can't point to just one single neuron onto which all signals converge and then diverge to give rise to the behavior. However, there are simple examples where pure convergence and divergence are observed. A classic example is the stretch reflex, also known as the myotatic or tap reflex. You've probably experienced this reflex yourself visiting a doctor's office. The doctor taps on your knee, and in response, your leg kicks out. This reflex is due to muscle contraction in response to stretching within a muscle after receiving the tap on the knee. This simplified circuit mediating the stretch reflex is shown here. It's a monosynaptic reflex which provides automatic regulation of skeletal muscle length. When a muscle lengthens, a sensory structure called the muscle spindle is stretched, and its neural activity increases. This increases alpha motor neuron activity via a single synaptic connection, causing the muscle fibers to contract and thus resist the stretching. Meanwhile, a second set of neurons causes the opposing muscles to relax. Overall, the reflex functions to maintain the muscle at a constant length, which has the nice property of allowing us to balance and stand upright without falling down. The function of the simple circuit of the stretch reflex critically relies on convergence and divergence. When the doctor's mallet strikes your knee, not one, but many muscle bundles are stretched. Each spindle sends a sensory axon into the spinal cord, where they converge onto a motor neuron. By converging in this way, the reflex can integrate the stretch of many neurons to arrive at an appropriate action. If just a few spindles are stretched, the signal might not reach threshold. But if a large number of fibers are excited, even weakly, the motor neuron can integrate these signals to produce an appropriate action to ultimately cancel out the stretch. Similarly, that one motor neuron doesn't just synapse onto a single muscle fiber. Instead, these motor signals diverge, resulting in the coordinated activity of a collection of muscles.